It's very hard to predict how they're going about this. I don't think there's any clear mechanisms of policy making with the current authorities. There are people in authority, but there isn't really a regime as such, and that makes it really unpredictable.
On this episode of TCF World, we talk to Lina Attalah about press freedom in Egypt. I'm Thanassis Cambanis in Cairo. Hi, this is Thanassis Cambanis. Welcome to the Century Foundation podcast. I'm in Cairo with Lina Attalah, the editor of Mada Masr, and we're going to talk a little bit about how things are going at Mada. Lina, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Thanassis.
So, I know it's an obvious first question, but tell us a little bit about what's happened with the access block to Mada's website and how you are dealing with it.
So Mada is one of over 100 websites that have been recently blocked in Egypt, mostly websites that provide content, particularly news content, but not only that. It's been 2 months that access to our site is not available for people living in Egypt unless they browse the internet using VPNs and proxies, which is what people tend to do in contexts where censorship is manifested in website blockades, like in Iran, like in China, and elsewhere in the world. The blocking, as you might have heard, happened by an anonymous party, in the sense that
the government didn't take public credit for it.
No, and also every single government entity we went to, from the telecom regulators to the press authorities, asking them whether they know anything about the decision or the reference to which the blocking took place. They would deny it. So it's also important to note that this is an unauthorized act of censorship from the state.
So there's not in other words, it's not like sometimes in China where they publicly will say that they're blocking this or that site. Here, no one is admitting that you're blocked or that they're blocking you.
No one is admitting that, and it might be also part of Egypt still positioning itself vis-a-vis this mechanism of blocking sites on the internet, because this is not typical in Egypt at all. Actually, unlike many other authoritarian neighbors who were for years and years, even before 2011 and the revolutions, engaged in this practice of blocking websites, blocking access to certain websites, Egypt has not been one of those. Egypt would typically, penalize people who express themselves on the internet by actually going to individuals and prosecuting them, as opposed to blocking websites. And this has been part of its strategy to, seem like an open country, and, that is one of its important spaces and tools of investment is an open and free internet, quote unquote. So it's very new to Egypt, that act of widespread blocking of websites.
So do you think what happened is partly the result of the government having just acquired a new technical capacity that it didn't have before to shut down specific websites?
I do not think the blocking requires so much of a tool that wasn't there before. It's referencing more the political position or the political direction to block websites. I think the blocking is happening in a very basic way. That said, it is important to also note that Egypt has been investing much more in the recent years in surveillance tools, more surveillance tools than censorship, as far as I know. And we're talking here about both mass and targeted surveillance. And we're talking here about, different sorts of tools and software that are imported from the US and Europe, despite some attempts to impose some bans on such imports, because of the use for violating human rights, basically. But as far as the blocking is concerned, I don't get a sense that this is happening just because they acquired recently new tools.
So why do you think then that we know that the arc of this regime has been, in general, to engage in unprecedented levels of political repression and closing the public space, and that's been consistent, I think, since before Sisi officially came to power. Why or what has prompted the government to decide that there's no longer a cost to getting rid of even the pretense of a certain elite level of free discourse, which has always been, as you said, a hallmark of Egypt that made it different from other authoritarian Arab countries?
I think the little cost analysis comes from the fact that what has been quite efficient in the last years of, as you said, unprecedented limitations on the political space is that, in fact, this political space has become extremely weakened. It is very easy to carry on more acts of crackdown and more acts of limitations on the space without anyone really able to stand up and do something about it. And to give you an example, the kind of weakening that is happening is not just happening on the basis of imprisoning certain figures, for example, in such a way where there's no one out there left to defend civil and political rights. We're talking about institutional weakenings as well. So a lot of the civil society organizations that would basically mobilize campaigns against censorship are practically unable to function right now because they are stuck somewhere between a lawsuit that is targeting most of them, particularly the human rights organization, and an extremely restrictive legislation that basically threatens their very existence. So we're talking about an unprecedented institutional weakening that is making it very easy for the authorities to, engage in any form of crackdowns without facing a backlash. And I have to also point to the fact that this particular type of crackdown, basically shutting down all these websites, I must say it's a very smart one because it's a very soft one in the sense that this time around they haven't gone after prominent human rights defenders or prominent journalists and jailed them, although this is not something that they wouldn't do, but it is the kind of thing that has a cost because there will be still some sort of a backlash locally and internationally. But what they did instead is that they went for a bunch of websites, blocked them, and the effect of that in terms of the response is much weaker than if it was someone put in jail, like Hossein Magad, for example.
Yeah, and the contrast being when your own is he a writer, editor, Hossam was questioned for some of the critical things he wrote, and he was taken in for questioning. I guess he wasn't even formally arrested, and there was a huge outcry, and that appeared. I was actually surprised that he was released. I thought that this government's record would make them that they wouldn't respond to that pressure. So it's interesting if what we can learn from this is that there are still some pressure points that matter to this government, and so they're trying to figure out what kind of pressure they care about, what kind of pressure they don't. And I guess also, are you aware of any kind of diplomatic pressure or outcry from anyone that matters to this government about the crackdown, or has it actually been radio silence for the last 2 months?
You mean from the West?
From the West, or from important Arab constituencies, or even Egyptian constituencies, because I think that when we have seen pressure, even pressure that hasn't worked, it's not necessarily only Western, right? It might be from Arab backers of the government that will say, hey, you're going too far on this. I mean, we saw that with the Al Jazeera case, and the government didn't care ultimately, but they got pressure, not just from the West, but they got pressure from their bankrollers in the Gulf.
Yeah, I think my sense it is a crackdown honeymoon, in the sense that those sorts of pressure that you're talking about, which would be, like a mechanism to make the authorities think twice after or before engaging in, another act of crackdown. I don't think this mechanism is no longer existent. I mean, the Europeans right now are engaging for the first time since 2013 in their council meeting with Egypt, which is the first since 2013, and which basically a gesture that carries finally the acquiescence of European leaders with the current regime, even though it is not a position that they have fully taken in the last years, or they will take it with a lot of hesitation or partially, let's say, but the council meeting basically is a gesture of complete support and backing of the current authorities. The same seems to be the case of the US.
So in other words, there's no loss of access or credibility for the government. It's the contrary.
I think not at all, and I think it doesn't have to do with Egypt's diplomatic success alone in these milieux. I think it has to do with the circumstances of the region and the Saudi leadership and pressure on, a lot of these countries that are supposed to make positions on Egypt right now. So we have to remember that the beginning of the blocking, which is the question we started our conversation with, coincides basically with the boycott, the Arab regional boycott of Qatar. So there is a lot of significance in that. And the first batch of websites that were blocked in Egypt are the Qatari websites, and Mada's name was just basically planted in there. So.
And in the history, the recent history of your most celebrated journalism has been reports that have detailed and chronicled various aspects of the abuse of power by the government and crossing red lines by looking, for example, at how the army actually engages in corruption or mistreatment of detainees, or the sort of nuts and bolts of what is illegal as well as morally troubling about this regime. And when they brought in Hossam, what it looked like is they were trying to silence one reporter, one voice who was chronicling and documenting these things. Do you think that the new technique is going to be to let you and maybe others go on with your work as long as they can make sure virtually nobody sees it inside Egypt? Is that the plan B?
The problem was, trying to make speculations about how they plan to contain whatever is left of, voices of dissent or critical voices that, try to hold them into account. It's very hard to predict how they are going about this. I don't think there's any clear mechanisms of policy making with the current authorities. Yes, you can, give them the very generic label of them being authoritarians, but it's not also the kind of authoritarianism that you can understand or make sense of or study through certain trends of policy making, for example. So I can't really guarantee that what you said now, which is that we basically block our websites, but make sure, leave us bark on our own so long as no one is accessing our content. I'm not sure that we can be, comforted by the fact that they wouldn't come close to us. We know that there is a bunch of media legislations, for example, that are in the process of being promulgated, basically, and they would basically mean the imminent closure of this entire organization, and not it's mere blocking from the internet alone, for example. So you never know. It's very unpredictable and chaotic, at least for us, the way policy making is made. And I have to point here to the fact that if we compare to another brand of authoritarianism, which is the Mubarak authoritarianism, you could point to actually a broader political regime that was practicing politics of authoritarianism in certain ways that we understood with time, and actually this is how we managed to carve out a margin through which we continue to be productive, to oppose, to critique, and so on.
There were observable rules and practices of the authoritarian
and there was
regime.
a ruling clique, and the president was having his own circle of civilian advisors who would
there were politics of a sort that were taking place.
Exactly. Right now, it is very hard to point to that. It's very hard to understand how this happens. And our sense is that there's barely a regime that can be talked about. There are people in authority, but there isn't really a regime as such, and that makes it really unpredictable for anyone.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk. This is Lina Attalah, editor of Mada Masr, and if you're not in Egypt, you can find their website at Mada Masr, which is MADAMASR, and see some of their excellent reporting. And thanks for joining us. I'm Thanassis Cambanis. This is another edition of the Century Foundation's World Podcast. TCF World has been brought to you by the Century Foundation, a progressive public policy think tank that seeks to foster opportunity, reduce inequality, and promote security at home and abroad. For more information about Century's work, please visit tcf.org or follow us on Twitter and Facebook.